All right, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and for some, maybe it's a good night. I'm really delighted that you were able to take time to join this webinar organized by the Resilience Technical Learning Lab on Nexus programming, and where we will delve into some strategies and experiences in integrating humanitarian development and peace efforts. Sometimes this is called as nexus, but there are instances where we also understand about double nexus, triple nexus, and so on, depending on the context. However, we will sort of explore together with our panelists on these integrated approaches and how it's crucial in addressing complex challenges, faced by vulnerable communities globally. So let me quickly introduce you to our esteemed panelist. I will start firstly with Dr. Zivai, a scientist by training who has been with ADRA since 2007. And her journey in ADRA began as the programs director in Zimbabwe, followed by her role as the country director. And since 2012, she has been the director of programs and planning at ADRA Afro region office. Focusing on climate actions in livelihoods resilience across Africa. Her leadership and expertise have been, pivotal in driving forward ADRA's climate action initiatives. So thank you, Dr. Zivai, for joining us. And we have next in line, I would like to introduce Hannah Dungu, a trained sociologist with a rich background in program management and emergency coordination. Hannah has been instrumental in shaping programs in various capacities across ADRA, including a role in Rwanda, Somalia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Since 2011, she has been serving as the Emergency Management Director at ADRA Africa Regional Office, leveraging her extensive experience to drive impactful emergency management strategies. So, Hannah, thank you for joining. And I also have a privilege of introducing you Herbert Pacheco, the programs director at ADRA Venezuela. With a background in education and a passion for humanitarian work, Herbert joined ADRA in 2019 as a project manager for ADRA Canada CFGB project portfolio. His journey from being an English teacher and a university lecturer to his current role reflects his dedication to making a meaningful impact in the humanitarian sector. And last but not the least, I have had privilege working with David Kutheka, and I'm also delighted to introduce him, the project manager at ADRA Kenya, with over a decade of experience leading livelihoods and climate change adaptation projects in the drylands of northern and lower eastern Kenya. David's expertise is invaluable. His background in agriculture resource management and experience with the World Vision Kenya have equipped him with the skills to build sustainable, resilient solutions against climate change impacts in vulnerable communities. So as we navigate through these presentations, let's keep in mind that the critical role of integrated strategies in addressing the interconnected issues of poverty, conflict, environment crisis that's happening around the world today. And I hope this sharing from our panelists will enable us to learn, inspire towards a more impactful and holistic programming. So let's embark this journey together now. And the flow we're looking at is we would have Hannah Dugu will start up with the presentation from her end on accelerating the Nexus approach. And then we would have Zivai pitching in after her. And then it'll be Herbert Pacheco. And finally, David will close with the case study from Kenya. So, and in the end, we would have 20 minutes of Q&A, and hopefully you all will be there for that. And we look forward to your active engagement in this webinar. And thank you. I see 44 participants and great number. And thank you for being here with us today. So I'm handing over to Hannah now.
Thank you so much, Avish. Please confirm that I can be heard. Happy to be part of this team. I just want to go straight to my presentation. And my presentation, I'm starting off with a story of a lady known as Abinka. And this lady, Abinka, I met her in Turkana County, which is in Kenya, and it is classified one of the arid and semi-arid areas. And Abinka, she has lived there since she was born. And the moment I started interacting with her, she started giving me the story of how her life has been when she was a girl, and even at this age, you can see her picture there. And she narrated how the environment has continued changing. Her life has evolved. And Abinka, she narrates her story concerning what she used to feed on and to feed her family even when she got married, and how things have changed recently. I met her last year. And Abinka, she started saying that the pattern of rainfall has changed. And this has led the livestock to shift, to migrate from Kenyan side across Uganda, where the family members would divide for them to stay in the Ugandan side with the livestock for almost 1 year. Then she will remain home with her children. And she narrated how she has, gone through that period of time for years now, limiting her from accessing things like milk or other useful things as a livestock, as a pastoralist. And thereafter, within years, Abinka says she has ended up, looking for other alternative livelihoods. And this story of Abinka is representation of many other women and many other men in the region who are facing various conflict and climate-related shocks, which is becoming more frequent and frequent, resorting to, exacerbating poverty, inequality, and vulnerability increasing. And with this, we just want to see the debate or the discussion that has been going on at the global level, at the regional, and even at the national level, because of all these effects of climate and conflict-related issues. And this brings me to the next slide concerning the various actors who have come together to weave around and to discuss what can be done for communities not to get to understand or even to be adaptive to the new normal that is happening. And we look at what does nexus mean? What does it mean to us? And I was looking at the definition, and this is a definition I got from Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD. This is a global, well-known actor. And they are talking about humanitarian development and peace nexus. It's a framework that brings, several aspects together in terms of weaving through collaboration, bringing different actors and complementing all our efforts together to bring a coherent response, and more specifically, preparedness, and also looking at ways how the gaps on finances can be filled in so that people like Abinka will be able also to experience these changes that are coming. Next slide. Now, what does nexus mean? It is about strengthening the coherence between humanitarian development and peace. This is all about nexus approach. And it is also about reducing people's needs and also reducing the, vulnerability in terms of preparing them for any disasters they are facing, and be able to bounce back without, destroying all that they have invested in. It is about reducing the humanitarian caseload and leaving no one behind, incorporating everyone, bringing the knowledge of the community, the knowledge of other actors in the humanitarian level and also within the development lenses, and pulling all these resources together within a certain period of time to ensure that the community, they are well prepared and they are well able to stand on their own. And it is about also looking at what are the finances that are required and filling that gap to ensure that the finances are available for that. Next one, please. Now, within the African context, I just want to mention three pillars. Three actors who have come up with the strategies that are very key in our region. We have humanitarian development peace nexus, a strategy that was developed by African Union. And this one came about because the African Union over the years, they have been spending so much funding in addressing conflict and security issues. For example, in 2021, the African Union released $20.1 billion to address conflict and security in the region. And these are fundings that were diverted to address the security issues. And this is where the debate came on board. How about addressing humanitarian intervention and bringing coherence with development and peace nexus, bringing all the actors, the government, the region, the globe, the national, the civil society groups to address all these issues together to reduce the effects of droughts and effects of disasters that continues to increase, including the climate change effect. Then we also have International Union for Conservation and Nature. They have developed a very good strategy in the region. We all know that our region, there is scarcity of water. And there is a strategy in terms of looking at water, energy, and agriculture security nexus, which is being implemented in different countries in the region. And more specifically, there's various programs that are being run by various actors in West Africa, Eastern Africa, and Southern Africa, not to mention, not going beyond that. Then we also have the World Bank. World Bank, because of the issues that are happening in Sahel, issues to do with conflict and other compounding effects on humanitarian that have left thousands and thousands of people, vulnerable. The World Bank has come up with a different strategy where they are focusing more on vulnerability cluster assessment programming, whereby the assessment programming is now used to even support the mechanism to raise funds to support these clusters, to reduce the effects of the people who are, affected in the Western Africa. These are just few of the strategies that are being implemented in the region. We do also have IGAD. They have come up also with another document that they are implementing in the semi and rural areas where conflict has become more imminent. Next slide. Now, looking at that, the global strategies on Nexus, and looking at the Africa nexus that have been developed at the regional bloc and various actors. What about ADRA? ADRA, at this time, we have been doing some work, but there is also a debate that has continued to support us to be very intentional in doing what we are doing to ensure that the community are self-reliant, they are able to operate in a peaceful environment. Actors are coming together so that all of us, we are able to contribute to a self-reliant society. And therefore, with ADRA, there is an aspect of building resilience that recognizes the value of enhancing cooperation, of various actors, and also mitigating the vulnerabilities of those who are affected, and also promoting peace. And this is coming through integration programming of within the Nexus lenses. And also ADRA has, expertise in integrating the needs, in the areas that we are talking about. And therefore, more efforts are being done to do that. And there is also the capacity, developing capacity and approaches of how we are going to provide the program to ensure that the community are more resilient. And therefore, when we look at this synergy where humanitarian and development, they are all coming together, this is one way of building and allowing people who are vulnerable to be acknowledged as part and the team of players in the Nexus approach. I just want to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Zivai, to continue within the development nexus. Over to you, Dr. Zivai.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Indeed, the issue of the Nexus approach is really critical if we are going to have any sustainable development. When we think about the Nexus approach, we actually realize that this is a method which allows us to deal with sustainable development challenges in an integrated manner, considering multiple variables at once. One of the realities that we experience in development is the reality that the issues and the challenges that communities experience are complex. They are so complex that the linear thinking that we have traditionally applied in the design and development of our programs is not sufficient, and it is not able to articulate these complexities. Think about the diagram that you're looking at. For example, you are dealing with the global sustainable challenges that include issues of food insecurity, water and energy insecurity, biodiversity loss, rapid urbanization. In fact, when you look at the case of Africa, there have been challenges. If I give you the example of Southern Africa, where a lot of the power is hydro-based, it actually means that there is a tension and a competition between using water for food production and using the same water, for example, for generating energy. And at the same time, there is a tension between using, for example, firewood for cooking and at the same time ensuring biomass cover and protection of forests, so that we are not increasing our damage to the environment and impacting the climate. So when you consider these complexities, you can actually see that they are straightforward correlations that we can have. For example, when resources are inadequate and there's a tension between the resources and the communities, this can actually result in violent conflict, because the tension between natural resources and sustainable livelihoods is very real. The same way that it is very real that you can have violent conflicts which can result in food insecurity because you don't have resources. So in the development sector, we are moving in a space where we acknowledge that the demarcations that we have had for many decades, and which we have maybe celebrated or upheld, of having humanitarian and development as separate, are actually not realistic, because when you go to a particular community, you can actually see that these things create a tension. So this Nexus approach, it promotes the integrated management of all these different resources so that we can address issues of global sustainability. and it allows us to facilitate system integration. When we talk about systems integration, we are actually acknowledging that there are webs of connectedness, as you can see in this diagram, that exists between the different components, and these webs must be dealt with and processed through a deliberate intervention, which allows us to untangle and to deal with these things. And there's always a tension. Sometimes we need a trade-off between what we would like to do in sustainable development and how we are dealing with sustainable livelihoods and how we are dealing with food security, for example. Sometimes they are complementary, and it also facilitates stakeholder engagement and exploration of sustainable pathways. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
I'm sorry, Zavai, I'm having issues, I think, with the slides. Let me please reshare.
Okay, that is okay. While she is resharing, I think you will see that the next slide is really just emphasizing that there are different ways in which different components can be working together. For example, when we want to achieve global sustainability, it's coupled with human and environment systems issues that require resource planning and management that goes beyond siloed thinking. So in development programming, one of the things that we are actually looking at is to desist from siloed thinking. And then within the Africa region, whenever country offices are actually developing their program strategic plans, we ask them to look at the tensions that are there and to have an integrated design which allows them to deal with humanitarian issues, because remember that humanitarian issues and emergencies are disruptors to development. And because they are disruptors to development, if we are going to sustain the gains of whatever development we are in, we need to look at those things. So if you look at the slide that you are looking at right now, there is the whole dimension of water, energy, and food as an area of concern. And within Africa, by the way, some countries are starting to develop policies that ensure that whatever developments are happening in energy take into consideration issues of water and food. So they are developing policies that are going to govern how energy is developed in different countries. I remember recently when we were doing climate action training in South Africa, I had the opportunity of just sitting next to one of the deputy ministers in the president's office, and she was actually saying, Adra, you're the kind of people we need, because we have energy that we are using from coal, and we are looking at, we might not be able to decommission right now, but how do we make sure that we are protecting the forest, the environment, and the resources that we have. Next slide, please. So when you look at the Nexus approach in development programming, we are acknowledging also that it consists of 2 or more interconnected components. The typical one, I think, is the one on the right. We are always thinking about the issues based. So we are saying, oh, okay, there's the issue of climate change. How do we deal with climate change, or health, or biodiversity, and how can we address that? But there's also the resource sector based, which is like the food, the water, the energy, like what I showed you a little earlier on. And sometimes it is the complex bringing together of these two which makes sense in a particular environment. So one of the things that we have also done is to develop tools that allow us to have thorough assessments of the areas where we are trying to maybe have a development intervention, and to say, how are we doing, for example, when we look at the resources, how are we doing with these capitals that we have in the community, and how are they connected with the various issues that we have in there? So it's very important that it gives us strong links between sectors, like, let's say, agriculture, water, energy, environment, and which probably should be stronger and stronger with every intervention. And we also realize the different risks, the different vulnerabilities and resilience capacities that come into play. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, just the understanding that the tension with the resources can easily result in conflict. And if a conflict then happens, it means that we can lose the gain. So we intentionally also program for peace. So when you look at a program strategic plan within the Africa region, these are the things that we are taking into consideration. And I want to emphasize that in development, one of the things which I know that probably cuts across all regions within our ADRA is the fact that we are putting the community at the center of what we do. So if we are going to specialize in a particular sector, let's say agriculture, or we are going to specialize in WASH, we are specializing for the sake of the communities that we are serving, so that these silos are broken and every speciality comes into play within the framework of addressing issues that are affecting the community. This is a different way of working, and it takes away the silos, which I always jokingly say, the compartmentalization that we have created is really for our benefit as humanitarian development workers, but it's not necessarily for the community. So we are talking about a paradigm shift. We are talking about a lot more systems thinking and systems programming. And those of you who've had an opportunity to look at the current strategy for ADRA, you will see that integrated programming is really key, and the ability to be able to intentionally design integrated programs to address and get better results from the community. Next slide, please. So in this slide, I'm not going to belabor the components. It's just to lay an emphasis to say there are specific drivers of change in any development framework. In this particular example, we are looking at the water, energy, food nexus, which I mentioned earlier on, and I'm placing a lot of emphasis on it because within Africa, this has become extremely critical. I think all of you can acknowledge we have the Sahel, where we have droughts consistently all the time, and we have other places where maybe there is flooding, and as I said, that tension that's happening. So we have these drivers of change that we need to look at and have a proper analysis of where it is. And it requires also systems thinking. And we normally use the resilience framework to assess the capitals so that we have a clarity of where things are. And then we plan our programs such that we can then look at the environmental issues, the societal issues that come into play. And with that, we can now move into different processes to deal with water, with food, with energy, to address the vulnerabilities and build resilience capacities, and then the adaptation, and looking at then having the results that we would like to have. So the bottom line is that these are things that we are already doing in one way or the other. Maybe in conclusion, I will also say that there are unusual nexus opportunities that we also have even in positive youth development. And it's a program that we already have in Africa where we use systems analysis in the design of the program, so that we are able to also have interventions that are supporting the young people for behavior change. And we also see the same levels of complexity, including the probability of even conflict coming through based on other factors that affect the children and youth in the community. And we are using outcome mapping to look at this. And we are also saying we need improved systems for assessing and monitoring what we are doing, so that we are able to demonstrate that the integrated programming will give us better results than siloed programming. I would like to hand over to our first case study, please.
Okay. Let's begin by saying that in Alta Venezuela, we were starting to work with livelihood projects, and it's been a wonderful experience to learn lots of things that we didn't know before. Let's go to the next slide to show the context of a very kind of unusual context. Venezuela used to be a wealthy country, and the poor people had a job in the labor force in the lower pay levels, but they had a job. And with the 20 years of crisis, the next slide, please. With the 20 years of crisis, the poor people lost their jobs, and they, because they were rural people, city people, they don't know how to cultivate the land. They're not used to it. It's a different context. Okay. Especially in the city of San Felix in the state of Bolivar, where we're implementing the livelihood projects. Uh, that city in particular, that state and that area of the state in particular in Venezuela had the largest enterprises, oil companies, and steel companies, and other mining companies. So poor people had jobs. But now, once these enterprises closed their businesses, they didn't know how to work the land, and they don't have a job. So that's the context of this situation. Now, also you can see in the map that place where we're implementing the project is the intersection of the Rio Bolivar, that's the Bolivar River, which is the third largest in the world, and the Caroni River, which is the second largest in Venezuela. You can imagine how much water, and in the city nearby, there is not enough water because they depend on the city's water system. People that live next to the river, they can buy a little water pump and have water for their houses and water for their land if they need to cultivate anything. But people that live away from the river, in urban areas, they depend on the city water systems, and that doesn't work well at all. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, we have been experimenting with what benefits we can get, and learning with the assistance of Adra Canada and Salil, who was always with us, supporting and telling us how to work with livelihoods. So we're trying to build community resilience and stability. Nevertheless, we have found in the next slide, with the challenges, we have found that people that used to be beneficiaries for the food assistance projects, they worked as individual families. Okay, they kind of went into some livelihood of personal initiatives on previous projects. But once we are working with the project of livelihoods, once we're working in a community context, not individual families, but in a group of families, that has been a challenge because people think about individual benefits for individual families instead of benefits for the community. So we're working. It's been a great challenge to make them see the picture as a community and not as a single family. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay, we identified the need to go into livelihood projects because we conducted some surveys. Okay, we had some the community advisory committees. We had focus groups, and they all manifested or expressed that they wanted to go into livelihood projects, but they had never seen a project like that. They didn't know what it was. So like I said before, they kind of went into individual families, kind of a single-minded focus instead of a community focus. And in order to build resilience and community development and sustainability, that mind frame needs to change, and we've been working on that. Okay, let's go to the next slide, please. We have conducted what we call the family support groups. We call it GDAFs. Family support groups are heads of households that come together in certain events that we invite, and in those meetings we teach them healthy habits on nutrition and manipulation of food, etc. And in those contexts, we have been trying to create a sense of community instead of more beyond a sense of a family need or individual needs, and instead of that, trying to make them think of them as a community. Okay. uh, so we found some challenges. We have some challenges. People, community leaders that used to be real good in food assistance, now in livelihoods, they because they see uh, kind of benefits for their own or for their relatives or neighbors or friends. There's a great tendency of conflict of interest on community leaders. So that's part of the challenges that we have been facing beyond the uh, property of the land. Okay, property. They have some small pieces of land that they can cultivate, but they don't know how to work the land because they're city people. So our livelihood expert on agriculture is providing the expertise and guidance for these people to go into livelihoods. Let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. On the next slide, I'd like to point out the migration. Everybody knows about 7 million people have migrated from Venezuela, and some of them are pendular, go and come back, they go and come back. And when they come back, some of them, not all of them, some of them go back to their own uh, negative lifestyle. Actually, I was kidnapped for 7 hours in the middle of the night by a group of 5 migrants that had returned to Venezuela, and one of them said that they found an apple. They found an apple in my suitcase and they ate it. And they said, one said to another, "I have not eaten an apple since I was in Peru." So these migrants really need to know, and I think, and we in Outer Venezuela think that we need to teach these people how to work instead of going into a negative criminal lifestyle. But if they come back to Venezuela, they don't know, they can't find a job, and they don't know how to work the land, they don't know how to do some trades, so they're going to a criminal life again. And at the end, I'm going to show you an example of a good example of a person like this. Okay, here is a timeline of Canadian Food Grains Bank. We have ADRA Canada, ADRA Venezuela. We select the families, and this person, Marcos, is a head of household, one of household, but he's a criminal. He used to be, better say, he used to be a criminal, a small time criminal, steals in the houses, breaks into houses, rob people that walk around the streets. Anyway, he started attending our family support groups, educational sessions, because his wife had to be with the many kids that they have at home. So he was at first very reluctant, indifferent, but he began to be interested in our educational sessions. He began to be friends with our volunteers and staff. A relationship was created, and he began to share what he learned with his family back at home. And he got to the point of realizing he was in a negative lifestyle, and for the benefit of his family, he made a good decision. He decided to stop crime and dedicate to a little small business. They started to buy and sell underwear, lingerie, and now that was in the previous project. Okay, that was in the food assistance project. and they now have a much better lifestyle, and he's not dedicating to a criminal lifestyle again. Now, why? Oh, the reason I bring this up because the triple nexus is this is a very good example of a triple nexus which unites the humanitarian actors, okay, the livelihood actors, and the peace actors. Now the community is enjoying better conditions of peace because there's one less criminal on the streets. Also, his family lives in a better condition of peace, and they also have been enjoying the food assistance and also the livelihoods. And finally, for the last slide, then we have the case of Maria. Maria, there you go. There's Maria. Maria used to consider herself a person with a disability, okay? But now she considers herself a person with a possibility. She started sewing clothes and selling clothes, to neighbors. She doesn't have a store. We're talking about people that live in the rural areas, but
Hello, Herbert. Did we lose you?
hello, can you hear me? I lost connection. Hello?
Okay, we can hear you now. Please continue.
Okay, I'm sorry, connection. I've been switching between 3 different connections and none of them is good enough. I'm sorry. So I am ending my presentation. Maria is a successful story. Marcos is a successful story of what triple connection or triple nexus is all about. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone. Thank you, Herbert. Thank you, Zivai, Hannah, Avish, and Kelvin. I think my presentation will be focusing on a case study from ADRA, Kenya. And most of my presentation will be building on what Anna and Zivai have presented, because ADRA Kenya's programming is basically based on ADRA Africa structure or programming on the nexus. Now, ADRA Kenya responds by integrating actions on issues to do with health, education, and livelihoods as part of the preparedness and response and recovery from the main disasters. Our approach is basically based on collective impact, on issues to do with faith and values, and of course, on people and systems. As you know, ADRA is a faith-based organization, and in every programming that we do, the main focus is based on the faith values. Next slide, please. I will be making my presentation based on the 4 highlighted points. And the first thing, I will focus on the context, on ADRA Kenya's approach towards Nexus programming. And it is basically on the 3 main pillars as Anna and Zivai have highlighted, on issues to do with emergency, development, and the peace. So we mostly focus on the triple nexus. And in terms of the nexus programming, the first thing we look at is the context analysis and the context appropriateness of the programming on the nature of the interventions that we are going to do. Then we have engagement and collaboration with actors. These are the county and the local leadership and the national government. Then understanding of community social capital and utilizing the systems to manage possible conflicts. These are things like marginalization, inequalities, and all that. Then, of course, we have inclusion and participatory planning and decision making. Now, next slide. as I have mentioned earlier, is that the main pillars of our Nexus programming is humanitarian development and peace building. So this actually looks at integrating the 3 pillars in line of our Nexus programming, which we popularly call the triple Nexus. And mostly this looks at the areas where peace is of paramount importance, particularly in the pastoral communities where my case study will be focusing, that is in Turkana County. And this brings me to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yes, now I will be sharing with you about ADRA Kenya's experience in Nexus programming, particularly in Turkana County. And this is one of the programs that have been funded by the CFGB, or Canadian Food Grains Bank. And it is focusing on humanitarian early recovery and development. The project is called Building Resilience Against Crisis Effects. And the goal is to improve nutrition, leading to resilient food security for different gender affected by issues to do with the drought, perennial drought that have been faced in Turkana County, as well as COVID-19. This project is working with around 2,000 households. And the areas of intervention, like I have mentioned, is humanitarian assistance, early recovery and development, and gender and women empowerment. This project initially was 18 months, where 6 months were focusing on emergency and 12 months were focusing on livelihood or early recovery interventions. Somewhere along the way, we extended the program, of course, due to the periodic drought crisis that have been faced in this part of the county. Turkana County, it is in the northern part of Kenya. So we extended this program for a further 15 months, and now we are in the 33 months of the program implementation. Next slide, please. Now, this project focuses on humanitarian assistance, early recovery, gender and women empowerment, and what we call participatory monitoring and evaluation, accountability, and learning. This is called MEL process. Now, this area had been affected by a series of drought. This program started in April 2021, which was actually the community was facing the third failed consecutive rain season. So the communities were facing hunger and starvation. So our first intervention was humanitarian assistance, and this was through the cash transfer. We did it through the M-Pesa. The M-Pesa is a digital money transfer program where we are able to transfer money from an account to individual mobile phone numbers, where the beneficiaries are able to access this money or use it while it is still in their phone. This, of course, had quite a number of challenges, of course, looking at the context that Turkana County, most of the beneficiaries were not able to access mobile phones, others were not able to access some of the M-Pesa agents. But of course, all this were able to survive, and of course, M-Pesa emerged to be the best modality for humanitarian assistance and cash transfer, based on quite a number of benefits that were not mentioned in this discussion. These interventions were coupled with some early recovery interventions, which, as we continued to do the cash transfer, which ran for a period of 6 months, we introduced some early recovery interventions as part of the Nexus programming, where we were able to organize these 2,000 households in groups that will be able now to receive different trainings, different inputs as part of resilience building. Alongside this journey, we did some rapid gender analysis that revealed that gender awareness was one of the main challenges that were derailing recovery in this area. So gender and women empowerment were key pillars in the implementation of this Nexus programming in Turkana County, the BRACE project. And of course, as we continued with the implementation, the aspect of monitoring was very key, because remember again, this area has been receiving failed rain season after season. And for this reason, monitoring the situation as we continue to roll out the livelihood and the early recovery interventions was key. Next slide, please. Yes, some of the key successes of this program, particularly the nexus between the emergency and the livelihood, of course, coupling with the gender, women empowerment, and the monitoring exercise, was that some of this was in pastoral context. The programming enabled the community to diversify their livelihood resources by introducing crop farming. Remember, these are pastoral community who never or had very little knowledge or any practice about crop production. So we introduced crop farming, particularly on high value crops such as watermelon, onion, and spinach, and all that. And of course, now it provided a sustainable alternative source of income for resilience building. Remember, some of these people who are receiving cash transfer through the M-Pesa were able to make some of this money in businesses, of course, as part of the trainings that we were and capacity building exercises that we are doing on the participants. And this provided a complementary kind of interventions whereby we will provide a platform for them to engage in development interventions and give them some resilience in the instances of such instances. So this provided actually a complementary kind of interventions that we are responding to emergency. We are also providing solution, and that is the nexus. Next slide, please. Yes. Some of the stakeholders have commended this kind of programming because it was a new approach, particularly on the stakeholders from the county and the national government, since it is providing some immediate needs and also addressing issues of resilience building. Being a pastoral community, some participants were targeted, more of them were actually vulnerable, and most of them were able to embrace some of the livestock production. And looking at the fact that livestock production was greatly affected by the frequent droughts, the crop production, particularly on the dryland farming techniques with the water-saving technologies, were able to provide immediate benefits to these farmers and therefore enhanced a quicker kind of adoption from many of the participants that we are working with. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, some of the challenges that we are faced in this programming in Turkana County, yes, included the issues of prolonged drought. Remember, even before these short rains, the last long rain seasons that were in April and May were actually another 5th failed consecutive rain season. And actually at that point in time, the county was actually in emergency based on the phase classification and by the NDMA report. So some of the people that were benefiting from this programming were actually unable to transition from humanitarian to early recovery because of that frequent and the worsening trend of droughts. And of course, you remember, currently there is a lot of escalation or increase in food prices. And mostly our MEB or minimum expenditure basket that determine the amount of money that we give are actually fixed. If we are giving 6,000, we give 6,000 until the end of the programming. So we find this being a challenge because when food prices escalate, some of the households are not able to meet the minimum food needs for their families because of that fixated kind of M-Pesa rations. So we need to be flexible in terms of when situation changes, we need to give a provision that can adjust the basket so that households are able to sustain their livelihood. Humanitarian activities, of course, I have mentioned that are able to complement the livelihood activities, and in that, farmers were able to, get income from both farm and off-farm activities. Our farm activities included some small businesses. I mentioned that people are able to start small businesses. There are those that started small kiosks, butcheries, were able to start grocery shops, and all those kind of small businesses. Again, one of the challenges actually that we face is that the ending of the humanitarian assistance at a time when drought situation was on a worsening trend. So again, most of the vulnerable households not able to transition. And that for us was really a big challenge. Much as we are trying, much as we can to, couple, integrate the early recovery interventions, you realize that most of these people are still, facing starvation. They are handling other challenges and therefore not able to transition. Next slide, please. Next slide. Yes, this programming, AdBreeze program, was basically on a double nexus, which focused on humanitarian and early recovery. We were never very keen on focusing on issues to do with conflict. And this was really a lesson to us, as during implementation of this program, about 150 participants from an area called Kangirisai, like I have mentioned in my presentation, which neighbors the West Pokot County faced, were forced to migrate from their homes. They left their farms, which they had planted watermelon, onions, and all that. And they left their farms for close to 5 months due to conflicts between the West Pokot and the Turkana County. So this informed the program that indeed conflict and peace component should have been key component for this programming, because remember, we were able, once the conflict were resolved, people went back to their farms. They could not find any farms and dried up. We had to rebuild their capacity, give them input support. The gains that we had already made in terms of livelihood were almost losing because of that period of conflict. So our lesson here is that we needed to have provided peace and conflict resolution as one of the key pillars of this kind of programming. Remember, these are pastoral community where they keep on, migrating in search of water and pasture, and this often bring this kind of conflicts, and therefore need to have peace as part of the key pillars of these kind of interventions. We also have some communities benefiting where the Nexus, we have provided the farms, and some of the groups are benefiting from extra interventions from other organizations. For instance, we have a group that we supported with the water system, with the inputs, with the training and capacity. And when the World Food Program came on board, they were able to see the kind of gains that this kind of Nexus has brought. And they supported this group with a further, water system. They gave them some fencing of their farm just to protect their produce, gave a gate, gave water pump, solar powered water pumps and storage and all those kind of things, and further training, of course, to benefit the women. So we think that provide this, again, Nexus programming provide a basis upon which other partners are able to build up and support the participants to move to an higher notch. Thank you. Next slide. Maybe, sorry, if you look at that photo, it shows one of the groups is called Lobokomaran, which is in neighboring the River Takwel. And when we gave them, during the emergency, during the cash transfer through the M-Pesa, we gave them the training and they were able to establish the farm. You can see the first photo on my left. It was during the land bush clearing, farm establishment. And you can see the next photo is the same farm that they have planted watermelons and they've been able to harvest. This group was able to harvest close to 20 or 200 tons of watermelon. They have had, for 2 seasons, they had close to 670,000 Kenya shillings. They were able to buy a motorbike to transport their produce from the farm to the market. They're also able to buy, they're also able to, support their households in terms of educating their children from the proceeds of the money that they get from this. And more importantly, the money that they got from these kind of interventions were able to be recycled back to the VSLA, where through the saving, through the VSLA, the communities are able to borrow and be able to sustain their key issues like paying school fees for their children, medication, and any other heavy thing that may come their family. So I think this kind of programming has really helped these communities in terms of moving from emergency and sustaining their livelihoods by resilience building. So thank you so much.
Thank you, David. I know there is a lot
Yeah.
more to share there, but
Sure.
definitely it has been a wonderful sharing case study from the Brace project in Turkana. So I have some good questions and comments made in the chat. However, we might not have time for all of that, but I would like to just take a moment here to appreciate all of you for giving your extra 3 or 4, 5 minutes. We are just 5 minutes over the time. So let me just conclude by thanking our panelists for your wonderful sharing and experience, both at the strategic level and also case studies specifically from Venezuela and Kenya. So there will be more series coming on the Nexus from Sudan and the other East African countries, so and elsewhere. So please keep a tab on your technical learning lab emails so that you can participate. So in conclusion, I would like to just say that a broader principle that we've heard in this webinar is adaptation and flexibility is really critical for effective Nexus programming. It's not like one structure or the other. There has to be a component of adaptability and flexibility to redesign from the scratch as you are implementing, depending on the contextual challenges. And again, I'm seeing that we could be targeting largely guided by humanitarian principles, continuing to focus on humanity, neutrality, and impartiality. And also Nexus programming happens along development implementation timeframe. So just keep that back of your mind. It's not like a 3 months in and out or 6 months in and out, but then thinking through a longer term programming. And also building resilience may require strategies to mitigate risk, prevent crisis, or contribute to early recovery that may differ from strategies in traditional development context as well. So, and also Nexus programming approaches can be employed from different starting points. It cannot be started with an emergency and then you're moving into the dev context, but then it could be vice versa as well. So you're doing a development programming, but there is an immediate need to address the emergency in that context. So we could focus on that. Again, Nexus programming does not have to be done by a single organization, that we can keep back of our mind as well, and should align with the capacities and experience of the implementing partners that you have on the ground, so that when you're exiting, there is somebody else who can take over the good work that you have done and keep that momentum on. So with that, I would like to conclude, and I would like to thank you all for your time. Thank you, gracias, and mercy, and you will receive the recorded version of this that you could widely share. Thank you all.
Thank you, Avish. Great day, everyone.